I spent most of my adult life driving through deserts, hauling equipment, working site surveys, the occasional prospecting job. It's lonely work, but I never minded it. There's something clean about the desert. No noise except the wind. No one for miles. Just space. But there's a spot out past Ajo, Arizona, that I won't go near again. Not even in daylight. Not for any amount of money. Back in 2019, I was running a solo survey for a mining firm that wanted to test soil and rock composition about 40 miles southwest of Ajo. It was almost to the Mexican border. They gave me a rough grid and a 3-day timeline. I'd camp nearby and do the sampling myself. Have done that work a dozen times, never had a problem. The area I was assigned to wasn't on any active road. I had to cut across rough desert scrub in my old Tacoma, using topo maps and GPS. No towns nearby, no cell service. Just a lot of hard-packed sand, creosote, and flat rock. I found a decent spot to pitch camp, somewhere along a shallow wash. The nearest structure on satellite view was a half-collapsed shack, about 3 miles west. I made a mental note to check it out once the job was done, just for curiosity purposes. I've always had a soft spot for forgotten places. Day 1 went as expected. Sample, bag, log, move on. I worked until the sun dipped down and the temperature dropped about 30 degrees in almost an hour, like it always does out there. I ate a fire-warmed can of chili, dipped in my sleeping bag, and fell asleep with the stars spinning above me. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up without knowing why. No sound, no animal, hardly any wind, just a strange sensation that pulled me out of sleep, like someone had called my name. I lay there listening, my hand on the zipper of the tent. Nothing moved. No crunch of paws, no wings, no insects, just silence. I waited a minute or two, still unfocused. That kind of stillness doesn't happen out here unless something is nearby, just like how it is in the woods. I reached for my flashlight but didn't turn it on yet. Instead, I slowly began to unzip the tent and peeked out through the flap. I scanned all the way around as my eyes adjusted to the light. The fact that I was now more exposed made me nervous, but in the bright light of the moon, I couldn't make out anything, any movement, as my eyes adjusted to the night. Now feeling a little bit more at ease, I brought out my flashlight and decided to scan it around the tent. Everything looked fine. That was until I saw eyes. 2 pinpoints of light, reflecting, glowing a dull yellow. It was far out near the edge of the wash, maybe 70 yards away or so. Too far to make out what they belonged to, but too high off the ground for a coyote or a bobcat. They didn't flicker or move, which kind of told me they weren't scared. They didn't blink, just stayed there, fixed in my direction. I stared back, barely breathing now. After maybe 15 seconds or so, the eyes simply faded. They didn't blink or turn away. They didn't adjust. Just somewhat disappeared back into the dark, like they were never there to begin with. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning I noticed something odd. About 20 yards away from my tent, I saw what looked like small, round impressions in the sand. I figured maybe it was from an animal, maybe a ringtail or something strange from the night before. But the shape was weird. Not paw prints. Circular. Almost uniform. Like someone had pressed the base of a walking stick or a small bowl into the ground, over and over, in no real pattern. There were about 12 of them, scattered about in a disoriented path. No tracks leading to or from, no indentations in between, Just those odd round depressions. Then nothing. The desert is a good liar, though. Wind can erase things in seconds out here. Day 2 was hotter, and the work was tedious. By early evening, I was sunburned and sick of myself. I remember the old shack on the map, and decided I'd check it out in the morning before heading home, maybe even grab a photo or two. That was the plan. That would be my lonely desert entertainment. That night, the silence returned. It was thicker this time. You don't realize how ambient the desert is until it stops. I couldn't hear the crickets anymore. The distant rustle of dry brush. Gone. Not even the occasional yipping of coyotes. Just stillness. Then the whispering started. Something like it anyway. It wasn't voices exactly. It was more like the sound of breath moving across a taut surface, like a hand brushing over a drumhead. Faint, but steady, moving around the tent almost in a slow, methodical circle. I held my breath and listened. It was like it ebbed and flowed. It seemed to pass close on one side, then faded. I couldn't place it. I normally would say it was wind, the way wind whistles and slithers through surfaces. But that night was still. There was no wind, and no animals that I could see or hear. I stayed still, no rash movements. I've been out alone in the wild long enough to know that you don't spook what you can't see. Then right at the edge of my vision, through the mesh window of the tent, I saw something move. It wasn't big, just a shift, a tall shadow, thin, stepping just out of view behind a cluster of creosote brush about 40 feet out. The shape was upright, too smooth to be brush, and it seemed to move with purpose, at least from what I saw. I froze. Could have been a person, a drifter, someone from the border, but that didn't feel right. My gut said otherwise. There was no sound with these movements, no crunch of footsteps, just a faint motion, and then nothing. And as soon as it left, whether it be a trick of my eyes or not, I promise you that is when the whispering stopped. The tent provided me about the same protection a blanket over my head would, but it was the same concept. Even though I was just a speck out in the desert, it's where I felt safest. I waited until sunrise to unzip the tent again. The moon was bright, but I didn't dare look long like the night before. When I finally stepped out, there were no new tracks, no sign of movement, not even the bush I thought the shadow ducked behind looked disturbed. It was just that wide, open stretch of desert. At sunrise, I packed my gear fast and drove toward the shack. It was still in my plans to check it out, more out of my stubbornness and curiosity at this point. It was about 3 miles west of my camp, partially sunk into the earth like it had tried to hide itself. Time and sand had taken most of it. The roof was slouched, half the boards brittle from sun and rot. The desert eats away at everything. But as I got closer, I saw carvings on what was left of the doorframe. Not graffiti. These were older, worn symbols gouged into the wood. Spirals and odd shapes that felt deliberate, but not for decoration. It looked like someone had tried to seal something in, rather than be welcoming. Inside, the place was gutted. No furniture, no signs of habitation. Just a weathered floor and the faint stench of dry rot. The walls were blackened at the base, as if there'd been a fire at some point, though there were no burn marks on the outside. That's when I noticed the floor was colder than it should have been. I crouched, ran my palm over the dirt, which felt damp. I started to cautiously dig with my fingers, not deep, maybe an inch when I struck something. It was a trap door. The handle was rusted iron, barely clinging to the board. I hesitated. Something in me said not to open it. Not with a place like this. Not alone. But I did. The hatch creaked open slow, releasing a puff of air so foul I nearly gagged. Not the scent of decay. It was older than that, like wet clay and mildew, with something faintly metallic. The hole beneath dropped into a narrow shaft, maybe 6 or 7 feet deep. At the bottom was a stone-lined floor, and what looked like a ring of burned candles. Some had melted away entirely. Others looked recently used almost, but I couldn't tell, and there was no way I was going to go in. There was a pile of something in the center, bones maybe, twigs. I couldn't tell. I backed away, suddenly feeling that same pressure in the air I'd felt the night before, like the desert itself was holding its breath. I knew then that I found something I shouldn't have. The sound I heard from inside the shaft just confirmed that. It was soft, like a muddy, wet noise coming from down below, almost like something shifting in mud. At that point, I closed the hatch fast, dropped a heavy board over it, and left without looking back. The ride out was rough. My GPS glitched twice, jumping coordinates like I'd moved a mile sideways. I knew the sun's position and followed the terrain the way I came in, but the whole area felt rearranged. It was as if landmarks weren't where I remembered them. Even the wash I'd camped beside looked narrower than before. At one point, when I felt I got far enough away, I stopped the truck, stepped out to get my bearings and just collect myself. When I was standing beside the door, I thought I caught something in the rearview mirror, something dark, just briefly. It could have just been a trick of my eyes, but it was enough to make me snap my head in that direction. I didn't want to see anything more. I didn't want to hear anything more or feel anything more. In fact, I didn't want to believe anything I experienced on this trip at all. I got back in the truck and didn't stop again until I hit the highway. That was 6 years ago. I finished the sample logs, left out the last day entirely. The company didn't care. They got what they wanted, and I got out. Since then, I've looked into that area a few times. I guess because I never really had closure. That shack doesn't show up on satellite anymore. The last capture from 2017 shows a vague outline of it, but nothing since. No road leads there. No record of any structure ever being built. Every now and then I think about it, of those faint sounds coming from beneath the hatch. It leaves you wondering about the history of an area, like grabbing a handful of sand and reading the details in every grain. From the glowing eyes, the whispers, the shadows in the night. I couldn't tell you what it was, but it was almost as if something was trying to find its way back.